They laughed at me across the table like I wasn't even there. My sister raised her glass, bragging about her real career, while my mother nodded with that satisfied smile that always cut deeper than words. To them, I was just the daughter who never measured up, the one who traded ambition for paperwork. My name is Azura Lockhart, and for years, I stayed silent, letting them believe I was small, invisible, irrelevant. But silence has a breaking point, especially when the very contract my sister is celebrating is sitting on my desk, waiting for my approval. Sunlight poured through the ironwork windows at Union Station, turning the marble floor into a bright grid beneath our table. The server set down another round of lattes and a stack of pancakes crowned with butter that slid slowly, as if even the syrup wanted to look away. "Still pushing government paperwork?" Vanessa asked, lifting her mimosa without blinking. "Basically a secretary, right?" A few cousins chuckled the way people do when they're not sure where the joke ends and the cruelty begins. My mother arranged her napkin with surgical precision. My father cleared his throat and asked if anyone had tried the lemon ricotta, an exit ramp masquerading as small talk. I kept my smile steady and my eyes on the tiny pool of coffee darkening the saucer. Words crowded my mouth, then filed back in neat formation. Not here. Not for them. I felt the weight of my government phone in my jacket pocket, a quiet metronome against my ribs. The real work lives on that line. Decisions that change budgets, timelines, and sometimes the margins between risk and disaster. At this table, I was the story they preferred. Tidy, diminished, familiar. "Don't be sensitive," Vanessa added, her voice floating over the clatter of cutlery. "Some of us have to close deals. It's just how the world works." I folded my hands to keep from answering and let the moment pass like a train through the station. Loud, long, and already gone. Then the phone buzzed. A sharp, insistent tremor that cut clean through the chatter. Priority directive. Sierra Vista Test Range, Arizona. Immediate presence required. Chairs scraped. Someone asked if everything was okay. I stood, leaving my napkin like a white flag on the plate. They think I'm just a paper pusher, but the file about to land will prove otherwise. Arizona's desert sun burned straight through my sunglasses, and the air trembled above the tarmac. Sand stung my ankles with every gust of wind. On the bleachers, local officials, military brass, and reporters squinted under wide-brimmed hats, fanning themselves with glossy programs. "Ladies and gentlemen, Sagitta Dynamics is proud to present." The amplified voice rolled across the test range. My stomach clenched. I knew that cadence, that exact inflection. "Vanessa." I gripped the railing, heat pressing against my chest like a second sun. She moved briskly on the platform, hair swept neatly back, her smile bright under the Arizona sky. I pulled out my phone, thumbs flying across the screen. "Are you presenting this?" The reply came fast. "Don't be ridiculous. I'm just here as a guest." But her voice kept echoing through the speakers, detailing specs, highlighting safety features, assuring the audience this technology would change defense forever. Every word stripped away the thin veil of denial. The UAV roared overhead, cutting a line across the sky before diving into the kill zone. Guardian Halo lit up, a flash of white intercept fire painting the horizon. Applause scattered across the stands. I didn't clap. My pulse hammered because I knew. This wasn't coincidence. Vanessa wasn't a bystander. She was in it. From the corner of my eye, I caught Priya Nayar, an engineer I recognized from prior test reports. She glanced at me quickly, then away, but not before I saw it. The tight fear in her eyes, the silent plea that said more than words ever could. And I understood. Something was wrong. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, sterile and relentless. Printers clicked in the background, feeding endless sheets into wire trays. I slid into my chair, dropped my badge on the desk, and opened my laptop. The subject line glared back at me. Sagitta Dynamics Guardian Halo. LRIP approval required. It had landed. I opened the attachments, scanning line by line. The performance logs looked clean. Too clean. But then I found it. A dead gap. 2.7 seconds, where the intercept system registered nothing before locking on. 2.7 seconds in combat might as well be a lifetime. Before I could dig further, a new message pinged into my inbox. Anonymous sender. Plain text. Guardian Halo almost hit a civilian neighborhood during a closed trial. The report was scrubbed. Check the logs. P. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I didn't need to guess who P was. Priya's eyes in the desert came back to me. The silent warning. The screen glowed cold in the dim office. Outside the window, D. C. The skyline blurred into rain streaks. Inside, my pulse pounded in my ears. Guardian Halo wasn't safe, and someone had buried the truth. I leaned back, the weight of the file pressing down harder than the roof above me. I wasn't just staring at a contract. I was staring at a weapon disguised as progress, a decision that could cost lives if I signed too quickly. I whispered to myself, almost a vow. They see me as nothing more than a bureaucrat. But this file could kill people if I look away. The banquet room glowed warm with candles, jazz spilling softly from a live trio tucked in the corner. White linens covered the tables, silverware gleamed, and the clink of glasses carried over 100 small conversations. Family filled every chair, the kind of night meant for photographs and toasts. Vanessa stood, glass raised high. "I've just closed a defense deal that could reshape the industry," she announced, her smile polished, her voice carrying across the room. Applause rippled from relatives, eager to bask in reflected prestige. Then came the inevitable. An aunt leaned toward me, voice sweet as syrup. "Eve, how's your job these days? Still pushing papers for the government?" A few chuckles followed, knowing and dismissive. I set down my wineglass, the stem cold between my fingers. My eyes locked on Vanessa. "You might want to be careful bragging," I said evenly, "because the Guardian Halo contract you're celebrating is sitting on my desk, waiting for my approval." The room froze. My father's hand hovered mid-air. His fork paused above the plate. My mother's eyes dropped to her drink, the candlelight refracting in the glass. Conversations died in a hush thick enough to choke on. That night, long after the last toast, my phone rang. A political aide's voice crackled down the line. "If you don't sign off soon, you're looking at thousands of local jobs lost. Think carefully, Ms. Calder." I stared out the hotel window, neon lights blurring against the dark Colorado sky. For the first time, my family knew the truth. And already, the pressure was multiplying. Rain tapped against the office window, streaking the city lights into smeared ribbons. My desk lamp cast a sharp pool of light over the USB drive Priya had slipped me. I plugged it in, heart steady but heavy. The folder opened to a single file labeled Flight Log. True. I scrolled through lines of data, my breath catching when I reached the highlighted code. Safety interlock Saturn bypassed. The intercepts that had wowed the press weren't victories. They were falsified, engineered by disabling the very safeguards meant to protect lives. Digging deeper, corporate filings unraveled themselves. Sagitta Dynamics was nothing more than a shell, a legal facade. The true owner, Aegis Aero Systems. The law firm attached to their contracts? Vanessa's signature dotted the paperwork. She hadn't just boasted at brunch. She was inside the very machine I now held in my hands. The sister who mocked me tied directly to the weapon she wanted me to bless with my approval. I printed the logs, slid them into a plain folder, and locked it in my cabinet. The paper felt heavier than steel. Something in my gut told me it wouldn't be long before someone tried to make it disappear. I leaned back, rain still drumming against the glass. The city swallowed in shadow. This wasn't just a contract anymore. It was my sister, and behind her, a corporation ready to crush anyone standing in their way. The bar was dim, tucked into a side street where rain streaked the windows and jazz played low from an old speaker. Vanessa slid into the booth across from me, her blazer still damp at the shoulders. She spoke quickly, as if rehearsed, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. "If you don't sign," she said, leaning forward, "the hospital where Dad's being treated will lose its funding from Aegis. Do you really want to do that to him?" The words cut sharper than any headline. She wasn't just my sister anymore. She was the messenger of a corporation willing to weaponize our father's health. That night, the storm outside followed me home in a different form. News alerts exploded on my phone. Government official blocks technology that protects our troops. Jobs at risk. My photo, snapped leaving a metro station, splashed across the front page, the caption casting me as the villain. By morning, I was summoned for review. I braced myself to be pulled from the process altogether. Instead, the department's attorney looked me dead in the eye. "There's no direct legal conflict of interest. You retain full authority to chair the review board." I walked out of that office knowing one thing for certain. I had nearly been shoved off the table. But instead of losing my seat, I'd be the one holding the gavel. I wasn't out. I was in. Sitting at the very head of the table they thought they could steal from me. The room felt more like a courtroom than a conference space. The flag stood tall behind glass walls. Rows of brass and lawmakers lined the front row, their expressions tight with expectation. Every whisper died when the COO of Aegis rose. "Priya Nayar is a disgruntled engineer," he declared. "Her claims are baseless and damaging." Priya sat in the back, hands clenched in her lap, the weight of the accusation pressing her lower in her chair. I rose slowly, letting my voice cut through the tension. "The Whistleblower Protection Act applies here, and this board will not bury evidence. We're ordering a public retest, under the eyes of the press, the community, and every one of you in this room." Gasps rippled across the chamber. A senator shifted uncomfortably. The COO's face blanched, his confidence faltering. From behind me, I felt Priya's gaze, her eyes wet but steady. For the first time, someone had stood between her and the machine trying to silence her. I hadn't signed away responsibility. I hadn't walked away. I had dragged Aegis into the one arena they feared most, the light of day. Either they would fall here, or I would. But this time, the fight would not happen in shadows. The desert sky bled into gold and crimson as the sun sank behind the jagged mountains. The old airstrip hummed with tension, rows of folding chairs packed with senators, city officials, defense brass, reporters, and curious locals. Camera lenses gleamed like a forest of eyes, all fixed on the launch pad. The announcer's voice cracked over the loudspeakers. "Commencing intercept test. Target drone airborne." The UAV screamed across the horizon, a silver streak against the fading light. Guardian Halo powered up, lights blinking in sequence, the hum of electronics rising like a chorus about to break into song. And then, nothing. A flat, hollow silence swallowed the range. A single beep echoed from the console. Error code, system freeze. The target drone sailed unharmed through the kill zone, vanishing into the horizon as though mocking every promise Sajida had made. The bleachers erupted, murmurs, gasps, questions hissed from one row to the next. Cameras snapped furiously, shutters firing like machine guns. Reporters leaned forward, phones raised, already live-streaming the failure to the world. The COO of Aegis blanched, his knuckles white around the railing. Engineers scrambled at consoles, flipping switches, whispering frantic excuses. But the truth was laid bare in the silence. Without bypassing the safety interlock, Guardian Halo couldn't do what it had claimed. I stepped forward, my voice steady enough to cut through the storm. "A success that isn't safe," I said, "is still a failure." The words carried across the tarmac, into microphones, into headlines before the ink was dry. Faces turned toward me, some stunned, some relieved, some furious. But all of them knew the truth now. Every shining demonstration before this moment had been propped up by deceit, by a calculated gamble with lives. From the edge of the staging area, Vanessa stood motionless, her hands at her sides. Her face was pale, eyes wide with the realization dawning hard. She had been nothing more than a pawn. The company she defended had used her ambition as a mask for their lies. The last rays of sunlight slipped away, leaving the field in shadows lit only by camera flashes. And in that glow, the collapse of Guardian Halo was undeniable. A contract built on false victories had just disintegrated in full view of the nation. The fallout came fast, louder than any press release or boardroom denial. Within a week, the Department of Justice and the Inspector General launched parallel investigations into Aegis Arrow. Subpoenas flew, inboxes were seized, and executives who once strutted across Capitol Hill in polished shoes suddenly refused to meet reporters' eyes. By the end of the month, Aegis signed a deferred prosecution agreement. They would pay a fine large enough to make headlines and submit to independent oversight. More than that, they were forced to release Guardian Halo's source code for outside auditing, an unprecedented humiliation in an industry that lived and died on proprietary secrecy. The board cleaned house, firing the COO and several senior engineers who had authorized the safety bypass. For Priya, the engineer who had risked everything to bring me the truth, the storm turned into a strange kind of calm. Protected under whistleblower law, she kept her badge, her security clearance, and her career intact. She thanked me only once, in a quiet email that read, "I can finally breathe again." Still, my responsibility wasn't just to punish Aegis. It was to protect the workers, the communities, the families who had no hand in the deception, but stood to lose their livelihoods. In closed-door meetings, I argued that we split the contract into smaller pieces: maintenance, testing, training, so local companies could compete and win, keeping thousands of jobs afloat. The compromise wasn't glamorous, but it was just, no one should starve because of someone else's greed. Back home in Colorado Springs, the echoes of the scandal reached the dinner table. Vanessa had been spared the worst. Her fingerprints weren't on the fraud itself, but she couldn't escape accountability. Her firm demoted her, assigning her to compliance and ethics. Less spotlight, fewer headlines. She hated the humiliation at first, but deep down, I think she knew it was where she belonged, working to prevent the very lapses she'd been complicit in. One evening, we sat at my parents' dining table, the same table where so many sharp words had been tossed in my direction. The candles flickered, the food was warm, but the air felt different, thicker, more deliberate. My father cleared his throat, voice slower than I remembered, heavy with years and regret. "Eve," he said, meeting my eyes across the table. "I'm proud of you for choosing what was right instead of what was easy." I didn't rush to answer. I only nodded, the weight of his words settling in my chest. For me, it wasn't triumph or vindication. It was recognition, late in coming, but real enough to count. That night, for the first time in a long while, the silence at our table didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a bridge. The desert morning was stripped clean of heat, the kind of crisp blue sky that made every edge sharper, every color brighter. I stood at the edge of the airstrip, the pavement stretching out like an arrow into the horizon. Engines whined in the distance as National Guard units trained with the new system, the replacement that had passed every independent safety audit. A pair of interceptors streaked upward, trailing white ribbons across the sky before dropping a target drone clean out of the air. No bypasses, no doctored logs, just a system that worked as promised. The crowd of young soldiers cheered, some raising their fists, some slapping each other on the back. For them, it wasn't politics. It was the difference between living through deployment and coming home in one piece. My phone buzzed softly in my pocket. I slipped it out, shielding the screen from the glare. A message from Priya. "Thank you for keeping us safe." Simple words, no flourish, but they struck deeper than any medal or plaque ever could. I typed nothing back, only held the phone for a moment before sliding it away. Some things didn't need a reply. I lifted my eyes to the sky, watching the drone shatter under the intercept fire, the fragments catching sunlight before fading into dust. The American flag on the hanger snapped hard in the wind, red and white slashing against the endless blue. For years, I had been treated like a shadow, even by my own family, dismissed, diminished, mocked as nothing more than a woman moving paper in a gray office. But paper carries power when it holds lives in its balance. That was the truth they had refused to see. Now, as the airstrip thrummed beneath my feet and the soldiers shouted with pride, I felt a calm spread through me. Not triumph, not revenge, just peace. They had placed the file on my desk, certain I would rubber stamp their lies. Instead, I laid my conscience across it like a weight, refusing to bend. That was the moment I built my own table. One no one could pull my chair from. I whispered to myself, the words carried away on the dry Arizona wind. They set the contract in front of me. I set my integrity on top of it. And because of that, the table is truly mine. The sky above remained unbroken blue, the kind of sky you could trust to hold. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could trust it too.